So it was definitely news to me that women were looking to the internet, not just women specifically, but everybody, right, was looking to the internet for very important life altering decisions. And I too have found myself surfing the web, right? Searching the World Wide Web in a sea of opinions and commentary by other people to make a general or really a very important decision in regards to my life. And I think that that's kind of where we have engineered society today, right? We have Chat GPT now and we talk about community, community, community. And it's like, what does that even mean, right? It is absolutely a buzzword. It does not change the social conditions that govern race, that govern politics, that govern one's identity, right? And so community has become more of a thing that is very capitalistic, right? People want you to attend their things, to buy their products, to, garner a sense of clout or whatever the reason, right? The list goes on. But community was not about saying, hey, you bring your goods and services, your whatever, 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 right? And you come into the community and we share and we partake in this sense of gathering, right? From a historical context, we know that community, especially for many brown and black, and I don't even want to say brown and black, I'm going to say black communities because I think it's important that we understand that, especially today where we have it's not a very hot political climate. It's always been this way. But we have this space in which we're existing today, excuse me, where what we do is we go above and beyond to ignore historical context and the things that make us uncomfortable. A lot of people do think pieces about systemic racism or Asian communities or whatever, but we really failed to address the very, very grotesque history that is African American history, even to this day, even in the modern era where everybody has a camera, everybody's a pseudo intellectual, everybody has an opinion, right? We're still not really addressing the people. We're still not really addressing the elephant in the room, the culture in which we appropriate, the culture in which we extract so much from, right? I do believe that for many people, and specifically women, when I think about African American women and reproductivity and all of those things, it's unfortunate, right? Because Black women's experience is not white women's experience. It is completely different. The psychological conditioning that is typically prevalent within the minds of white women and white people in general is very different of that of Black women. And what we've seen in the past, right? And I don't want to say this, necessarily in regards to the feminist movement, but I'm using it in the context that Black women were excluded from the women's movement and the feminist movement, right? Because they weren't a part of that. They weren't a part of that in regards to what white women were building, right? Because of racism and so forth. And so when Black women, start to take on the ideologies of white women, things get very dangerous. Right? Because understand this, and specifically in regards to child rearing, we had community. All right. We had community. White women had nannies. You see what I'm saying? And so what's unfortunate today, and I think we start talking about motherhood, it's a lot, but I'll start off by saying this. You have people who are very emotional, who are having a very hard day, who are having a very hard season, who are having a quite literal mental health breakdown because they may not have anybody to talk to, right? Like I said, socially, we have been engineered in such a way where our isolation is normal. We no longer talk amongst one another, right? Because of social media, comparison has spiked at an all-time high, which quite frankly eroded our sense of safety and community. So you no longer call your homegirl and tell her what you're going through because online, everybody's flexing it up. Everybody's got to look like they got something going on. There is no sense of vulnerability, right? Because people are going to talk about you. Your business is going to spread like hayfire. You know what I mean? So that changes everything, right? And so what would be a shared moment with another person has now become this thing where you have to constantly be on guard and defend yourself and protect yourself. Also want to preface something too. I told you guys this, especially in regards to relational dynamics. Has Black women and Black men's business always been in the media and in a cultural point of conversation? Yes, it has. But what took place here recently within this modern technological era is something I don't think we've ever seen before. I think that it has gotten really, really bad. I think that there's a myriad of reasons for that. I think there's a lot of different aspects to consider, but people were wilding out, right? And so I think when you start talking about motherhood specifically, really what you're saying, and this is just all across the board within this generation, right, is we have a bunch of young people whose minds are filled with so many ideas about the world, who have very little experience to compare it to. And so it's almost like if, you talk so much about these little kids and their tablets, right? But here you are at 20 something, 30 something, and all you do is sit and look at social media and listen to social media and watch people online, right? And after a while, you no longer have control over reality. You're no longer able to say, hey, this is what's real, this is what's not real, right? Social media is no longer this thing that you divvy in, or the internet rather, it's no longer this thing that you'll kind of engage with for some type of like research, right? People are pulling up blogs, people are pulling up Substacks. We don't know if these are bots. We don't know if this is a white man cosplaying a black man, white woman cosplaying a black woman. We don't really know. But these are the things that we start to base our sense of factual evidence on, right? People are no longer even fact checking. I know Facebook got rid of their fact checking database. I think that's all meta, to be honest. I don't think that there is any fact checking databases anymore to say, hey, this is what's real, this is what's not real. Right? We know that celebrities, people who are paid millions of dollars, are now the persons who are in our parasocial group. So they are also influencing decisions, right? They're also influencing perceptions. And so what's really unfortunate is that I think you hear too much about people who make decisions that may not go right. You don't hear enough about people who make decisions that you don't hear enough about people who make decisions from a mature place, who are content. And one of the things that I was getting to with this generation and people in general, it's not just this generation, but the new ways of social engineering, is that our brains are no longer conditioned for adversity. From a very superficial and surface level, context, a lot of people will try to make the argument and rebuttal that, well, if you're from a religious background, there's this normalization of suffering. When the reality is that human life is suffering. That's not a religious context, right? It's not a religious concept, that's a philosophical context. That is a human context, right? And they tell you that all the time, right? Psychologists say, even in moments of happiness, there's always a little bit of sadness, right? Why we are wired that way, I don't know, right? And this is in part why we have the detriment of intellectualism, because you have everybody who want to be smart, but nobody's going to college. We debunked school. We got rid of the educational system. We got rid of structure, but yet we're saying, hey, I'm smarter than this, and that, right? I single-handedly can rewrite the rules, right? So there's really no humility in regards to intellectualism today anyway, right? So you have a bunch of people who know things, but know nothing at the same time, right? And so if everybody's, independently in their learning, right, you're going to have people who are isolated. You're going to have people who gravitate towards groupthink just merely to have a sense of community, because like I said, in regards to social engineering, we no longer have that sense of a sharedness and collectiveness anymore, right? And I was using African American people specifically because our culture and our communities, our ways in which we were doing things at one point, before white people got in our business, we actually were okay and we could get along with one another, right? But when you start single-handedly, taking persons out of that community, putting them on pedestal, giving them millions of dollars, and you're leaving other people behind, that's going to create a rupture. That's going to create an imbalance, right? So I think it's important that we understand African American history, because it's not just slavery. It's that we were then, freed from slavery, right? Emancipated, and then put into ghettos, urban communities where our grandmothers raised us, where our parents raised us, and there were drugs, there were guns, there was I don't think we understand that. Then simultaneously, we now no longer have this revolutionary culture where there's music and dance and hip hop. Now we have garbage, right? Rap music that it then encourages and normalizes and almost glamorizes, right? The violence. So you sort of start to have this sensationalism of our demise. And that's where we are today. And it's important that we understand that, right? So when I think about motherhood, and like I said, with this generation and its aversion to suffering, do I think that means you're going to have people who are self-centered? No, that's not I don't think that there really is no hyper, alternative, right? There is no other swinging back to the pendulum per se. But what I will say is, I think, I don't think people really consider life and how life is very long, right? You have these ideas about community, and I do think people are going to start to morph and contort themselves to be friends with other people in community because humans are wired for some type of attachment. And I'm not saying you need to find that attachment through marriage or childhood or child rearing, right? But what I am saying is that, we're really engineering a new way of living that we've never had before, right? We live in American society. And so there is not going to be this sense of community where, you're going to sit around with people for the rest of your life and you guys are going to kumbaya, right? People will inevitably start to make their own decisions. It's almost like high school, right? And I think that's what you have with a lot of young people today and people in general, really. People were trying to re-engineer high school, right? This environment where we're all in this together. We're all going through the same things together, right? And that's just not real life. I don't think people really take into consideration like what they want with their life and what they can endure, right? And I say that because I think the supplication to human attachment, whether that be through child rearing, whether that be through marriage, partnership, whatever, right? And I'm not just talking about those two contexts. I think just in general, right? The things that we typically do to branch off because that's just life, right? I think that, people don't really consider like, what is that to really exist with the realities that community, and especially when you start talking about hobbies and things like that, it's not this sustained thing, right? Like community is not sustained. People branch off, a lot of people who are like child free, blah, 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 right? And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with this, right? But I'm saying that sometimes people change their minds, right? Sometimes people meet somebody new and you start to see people kind of branch off, and that inevitably will rupture a friendship. That will inevitably take a person out of the community, right? Because at its core, America is still fundamentally very individualistic, and specifically white people, right? Like, it's convenient to talk about community today because, they are no longer partaking in some of the benefits of material comforts and wealth, right? White working class individuals were now, I feel like for the first time, neck and neck with a lot of other working class individuals, right? A lot of minorities. And we've not seen that before, right? Even on average, white Americans who were middle class still made more than us. And I think for the most part, they still do. But even if, wealth may not be the barrier, right? It could just be parasocial. I don't know, right? I don't want to go too deep into that. And I'm being quick here. Obviously, I want it to be brief, but yeah. And so I'm more so just saying that everyone thinks that community is going to be the thing to supplement. And I just wonder, is that merely a fantasy? Right? Because what's very evident to me is a lot of people in this generation make their decisions based on fantasy, based on something that is idealized. And so what you kind of start to create, right? We should talk about this virtual reality that everybody is so afraid of, that our children are partaking in with our iPads or whatever. We too are partaking in that. So really what you have is people who can no longer reckon and with reality, and who can no longer exist within the world in a very real way. And the truth is that for many African American people, suffering was not just a season. It wasn't just, religious affiliation. It was existential, right? Like I said, Black grief is existential because African American people have been denied the right to humanity. We've been denied the right to equal access. And still to this day, we are denied acknowledgement, right? For the things that we have endured and the things that we continue to endure. The Voting Rights Act was cut, and they're, inducing gerrymandering. And there was not any commentary by and large, right, from white Americans and white kids and whoever else decides to partake in cultural appropriation or this new wave of pseudo-intellectualism where people come online and they like to talk and, we all use words and we say things and we want to sound like we are so pro-community, right? So every time something takes place and there's a drawback on African American people, white people are silent, right? White people are quite frankly silent, right? And there was a piece on Medium where a writer spoke about how even in today, right, white Americans have been voting this way for years now. And now that they are kind of having some type of morality and, the sense of reckoning with their morality, they want to look to Black people to be the emotional conduits. And I think that that's something that's taking place within these relationships, right? White people are saying, you know what, I don't want to be just, gated in my community. I want to come out. I want to socialize with Black people. And, we become the containers for their guilt. We become the ones who take their hands and, bring them into the joys of our community and share our lives with them, right? And offer this sense of like a new world. And then they, partake in partnering with our, people within our community. And they too go off enjoy white wealth. So it's like, I don't know. I don't know. And so I guess my question is, I think we're doing something very new, right? It's not just about reproductivity. I think just on a human level, right? It's something that is very new, and I don't think that anybody really knows what the repercussions of that is going to be. But I do think we've come so far from engaging with reality, engaging with hardships, engaging it with what it is to get up and do things in the world, that we sort of just start supplementing people who can no longer sufficiently move throughout the world and become successful and do hard things, right? And we supplement with technology, right? We supplement with tech. So if you can't talk to somebody in real life, that's okay. You can build an online community. If you can't make money in real life, that's okay. You can build an online business or whatever, right? And what started off as something that was seemingly lucrative has now grew into this very, very infectious monster that not only influences your economic positioning, but it influences how you think, how you see people, how you engage with the real world, right? And so that's why you'll meet somebody in real life and you won't actually know how to read a room, right? And how to be socially, like you're almost like socially inept, right? Because the way you see the world and see people is through the lens of virtual media, and that's not very coherent. Right. And so, I think that's kind of what you have today. And I think if the answer is but what's funny, I think the reason why we don't see a problem with it is because I think that we get so much stimulation from being online that we no longer realize that what is missing in our real lives, right? We no longer have to go out in the real world and acquire resources and build community, so to speak, and be kind to people and not, be backstabbing and use the woman's story who's online having a mental health breakdown, right, about her children, right, and not use her as a marker of comparison about our own life choices, right? We no longer have to engage with that level of compassion that is required at a very basic level. That's why, when people talk about community, I say, who would want to be in community with you, right? So many people are so mean. So many people are so comparative, and they're, you know what I mean? I was watching videos of the contemplations from African content creators, which I think is very strange, but very, African content creators typically take a lot of TikToks from Black people, and they'll make videos or whatever. But, these creators were just talking about motherhood and how they were grieving and regretful and all these different things, right? And I'm just thinking to myself, like, looking at the comments, right? And everyone's like, I'm so glad that they posted this video because I feel so much better about my choice to be child free. And, you start looking at these conversations and you start looking at what it is to be either or, and you realize how many people use that as a marker, right, of self-esteem, and how they use that as a measure of, defining their quality of life. And it's like, why does someone else suffering seem to justify your choices or your own suffering, right? Because the reality is that there is no getting out of in any life, right, in its perfect way, and maybe not in America, right? I know you guys you're fascinated with Europe and all these other white dominated countries or whatever, but like, for the most part, life is going to come with its trade-offs, right? And, it's not to say that, women who don't have children are lonely or whatever, but it is to say that people don't really talk enough about, the addictions and the ailments and the things that come with people who are perpetually lonely, right? And they don't talk about what that life is like, because surely not everybody is single and thriving, right? Not everybody is, dating and having all these great friends and living these great lives. I think really what we have in our minds, right, is this measure of a white woman who's incredibly wealthy, right? And typically, it's these women who are influencing things anyway, right? Influencing the media, influencing beauty standards, influencing how women think, like I said earlier, in feminism and gatekeeping Black women and all those things. And so I just think if you probably didn't have people in positions of power who were very privileged, i.e. white people, you might have a little bit more honest reality. You might have a little bit more realistic grasp on reality, right? And so what people are doing is they're measuring their success against white privileged individuals, right? White people were the only people within American society typically right? Typically, not always, but typically, who were able to be anything that they wanted to be. If they woke up today and decided they wanted to be trans, they could still be supported. They could start a movement. They could become a community leader and make $100,000, right? They're not going to deal with unemployment. They're not going to deal with being assaulted. They're not going to deal with any of that, right? And it's not just about trans people. That's anything. If they decide today they want to leave their husbands, they typically, not always, but typically, right, they're going to be financially compensated for that, right? So their ideas and their using them as a marker and a standard of success is very unrealistic, right? Because they are always going to have some sense of comfort, because that is the fabric of our nation. It is white comfort, right? And so it's important that people know that. And I think when you start measuring your life against the life of white Americans who are privileged, whether it be women, whether it be single mothers, whether it be career women, right? You guys went ham on Emma Grede in her commentary on the Kiki Palmer podcast, right? And everyone was very much aware that that business advice or that corporate advice was not going to be applicable to Black women, right? Right? Okay, great. We're going to just try to follow through with a little bit of coherency, because I know, we get online and we talk out the side of our necks and we don't really like to put two and two together, right? So just stay with me. I'm being funny, but stay with me. So you guys went ham on Emma Grede and you said she's British, she's beautiful, she has a white partner, she's in proximity to wealth, the Kardashians, blah, blah, blah. So if we are saying on one end, Black women are gatekept from corporate jobs in acquiring this level of success that is very aspirational, right? When you think about being child free, you automatically think about the woman who has a Pilates course, and she's doing all these different things in her fabulous apartment, right? And she's fabulous. She has all these friends and all these different things. So what exactly are we saying? Because in order for her to have access to these communities and to Pilates and all these different things, she does need a level of wealth. And on one end, if we're saying that this is the ideal standard for child-free women, and this is what women should opt into, this endless bound of material comfort and freedom, then how can we say on one end that that type of business advice or corporate advice, right, that would lead women to that level of financial freedom, we're now saying that that's not accessible to everybody, right? So it's like, that's the danger, right? And hear me out, because I want to go ahead and wrap up. This is the danger of making your decisions based on social media. Right? That is my entire point. This is not about child free. This is not about childless. This is not about, children, right? This is about making your decisions on social media, because the way you look, where you come from, your educational background, your ability to present yourself, your ability to sell yourself, who your friends are, who your family are, what you do on the weekends, what you have access to, okay, is going to greatly determine your life. Why? Because that is the fabric of our nation. It is discriminatory. It is racist. It is not based on meritocracy. It is not based on fairness. It is not based on justice. It is rooted on lies. It is rooted in commercialism. It is rooted in propaganda, right? It is rooted in all of these things that do not make for good decision making, right? It does not make for good decision making, right? Because it's not coherent. Why it's not coherent? Because it's not honest. Right? When something is honest, it doesn't matter how you slice it and dice it, you're still going to get to the truth. When something is not honest, you have to cut through the noise to then get to the truth, right? So I personally, as a mother, I do not look at women who do not have children and say, I am so glad that I have a child, right? I do not look at single women and say, I am so glad that I am, like, I don't base my life on that. And you know what? The fact that people do is the reason why community is merely a buzzword. It's a buzzword because you guys aren't looking for community. You're looking for someone to validate your low self-esteem and your low self-worth. You're looking for someone to say, you know what? You are better than such and such and such and such and such and such. Right? Because you know what we need to talk about? We need to talk about Black grief. We need to talk about Black grief. You guys got close to white wealth and you guys are grieving and we're not having the conversations. You know why? Because your white friends aren't going to tell you. Your white friends are still not acknowledging you. And I know I sound radical, but I think we need to just cut through the noise and get to the truth. And I need you to hear me clearly. Somebody's lying. Somebody's lying. Somebody is lying. On one end, we talk about colorism. We talk about who's getting what, who's getting paid this and that. But on the other end, we say that we can all do it. We can all live this idealized version of life. We can all be profitable. We can all go to Pilates. We can all do the things and have the things and dilly-dally and do the things that we want. On one end, we blame the girls with the BBL. But But we refuse to acknowledge desirability. We refuse to acknowledge, right, our pseudo-intellectualism. We refuse to acknowledge the hypersexuality of the Black body. We refuse to acknowledge these things. And this is why it's not coherent. So I'm done. I just want to encourage you, do not make your decisions based on social media. It's going to be hard for you because I think what you're going to have to do is reckon with your reality, whether you're lonely, whether you're broke, whether you're struggling, right? But I need you to reckon with your reality. And the reason why you are so adverse to suffering, especially as a Black person, is because you have white friends and because you're listening to white people. White people don't suffer, baby. That's our story. Right. So they can't sit here and tell you and regurgitate what religious this and that. They can't. Don't pick up those ideologies. That's not going to help you, Black girl, Black boy. That's not going to help you. You know why that's not going to help you? Because that is not your experience. That is not your reality. That is not your reality. We need to talk about grief. We need to talk about grieving, Black people, because we've come so far and we've yet went nowhere. All right. We're going backwards. We've come so far and yet we've went nowhere. All right. We need to talk about access. If we're going to have the conversations, that we can't be giving out fantasies. All right. Are we having conversations or are we living in imaginations? What are we doing? What are we doing? Y'all let me know, because the way we oscillate between, idealized and reality, I don't know. I can't keep up with you girls anymore. I don't know what we're doing. Are we telling the truth? Or are we not telling the truth? Are we living in reality? Or are we not living in reality? Are we defending the Black culture? Or are we what? What are we doing? Are we imagining Black culture? Are we painting over the white coat? Are we blindfolded? Are we blindfolded by the whitewashing? Are we reading our books? What are we doing? What are we doing? What are we doing? Peace.